Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to join you in extending the warmest welcome to our visitors from Birmingham University, the alma mater of my beloved sister and attorney at law, Lydia Fisa. Welcome. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to report to the good people of this country on our stewardship, but more particularly mine, for the last 10 months or so. After all, on July 26, 2021, the people of Castries Central offered me to accept a job from the Honorable Prime Minister by placement in his cabinet. The people of Castries Central hired me, and in that regard, until such time, I remain their humble servant. Mr. Speaker, I have had reason to speak on several previous occasions on what I found on two different developments that I inherited from the last administration, and they are the shock and Talvin developments. I have updates on each of these, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will recall that I disclosed that both of these developments were subject to an 80-20 agreement. That is, both developments were given to Fresh Start. They would put in the infrastructure, and from the proceeds of sale, Fresh Start would get 80% and government would get 20%, irrespective of the ownership of the land being vested in the government and people of this country. That meant, Mr. Speaker, for both developments, for every $1,000, $800 would be that of Fresh Start, and a mere $200 would be that of the government and people of St. Lucia. As we say colloquially, Mr. Speaker, sassy on crève. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am sure you and all others who have heard such an outrageous decision would assume that something is not right, as it does not sound right with those deals. After several meetings, inclusive of the Office of the Attorney General, it was advised, Mr. Speaker, that both of those contracts be terminated for cause. This was done, and both contracts were terminated. A team was engaged, Mr. Speaker, to advise the National Housing Corporation on essentially how to move forward on completion of each of these developments. This was done, and the team, which comprised of Mr. John Peters, Mr. Adrian Dulcie, and Mr. Terence Sinclair, produced extremely comprehensive reports of each of the developments, Mr. Speaker. They are quite voluminous, Mr. Speaker, but from a cursory inspection, one can decipher how comprehensive this Bible is. Mr. Speaker, before I even disclose the more salient findings of that esteemed trio, I need to ask the former Minister of Housing, why was he on that shock development so often? Mr. Speaker, I need to ask him, were the contractors working for him in a personal capacity? You see, Mr. Speaker, every time anyone visited the site, there was a member of staff of the National Housing Corporation who was stationed at the development and would make a note of the visitor. Mr. Speaker, the former minister's name, Guy Joseph, appears so much as a visitor, one needs to ask whether he lived on the development. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I wait with bated breath. I wait with extreme anxiety of the appointment of the special prosecutor. Because one would need to discern what other considerations were taken cognizance of to arrive at this outrageously disadvantageous deal to government. I guess time will tell. So, Mr. Speaker, the team found that there were many material breaches by the company, Fresh Start. Things which ought to have been done by them were never done, and therefore the termination with cause for both of the developments was totally justified. They were supposed to have gotten approval from Lucia, and the costings, they did not. Wasco costings and approval, they did not. They were supposed to do estimates for the infrastructure and to provide a bank guarantee for those estimates. If there were no estimates, Mr. Speaker, there cannot be a bank guarantee for what does not exist. So, in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, I tell you of the material breaches that essentially lent themselves to a justifiable termination of both contracts. Mr. Speaker, as one team member said, this new government cannot be seen to be continuing an illegality. He considered both developments an illegality. But you see, Mr. Speaker, I pause here to reminisce a bit. That is how the last government operated. They operated as though they were above the law. They operated with utmost lawlessness. I don't have to go into a multiplicity of examples which I know the member from Swazel would be very well acquainted with. Very well acquainted with. Lawlessness from the top. No deputy speaker. First sitting of Parliament beyond the 30 days prescribed by the Constitution. When the Prime Minister was asked about that, he had the audacity to say to the media, Mr. Speaker, that the Constitution did not impose any sanctions or did not stipulate sanctions, as if implicitly he's at liberty to breach constitutional provisions with total impunity. That is what he meant, Mr. Speaker. And that is the lawlessness with which the last administration went about the business, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I cannot help but remember the last administration undertook a human resource center in Bexham. And as soon as the local government was installed, I spoke with the rep and them, and I asked them to check on what is happening, because those facilities come under council's management. Mr. Speaker, you will not believe that it was the constituency of the same Guy Joseph. A $10 million project, $10 million project, sitting on a riverbank, was not approved. Not only it was not approved, the Development Control Authority delineated 26 reasons, not one or two, Mr. Speaker, 26 reasons why this human resource center should not be constructed in that locality. But again, Mr. Speaker, you are dealing with a bunch of men who sidelined legality. And so, notwithstanding the blatant refusal for permission to build in that location, the Human Resource Center went ahead. The Human Resource Center went ahead. They had already spent almost $1 million in the foundation. But last week, and mind you, Mr. Speaker, mind you, it is not the DCA of this current government who did not approve it. The Development Control Authority, the board that was instituted by the last administration under whom they served, were the ones who did not approve it for 26 reasons. This new board came in, I think they multiplied the 26 by 2. And so, in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, neither of the boards that serve under the different administrations have given the nod to the project. But yet, a $10 million project has started. And then we talk about lawlessness. We talk about lawlessness. But if we do not exemplify what adherence to the law is, what do we expect from our citizens? And you know, Mr. Speaker, that project continues. I don't know how it happened. You know, sometimes, Mr. Speaker, and I've told my colleagues that we need to examine what is happening around us, because the $10 million to construct that facility is the proceeds of a World Bank loan. How on earth can we start the expenditure of a loan secured from such an esteemed institution that normally dots its I's and crosses its T's? And yet, as a prerequisite, you need DCA approval. There are 26 reasons why it's not approved. Somebody needs to be held accountable, Mr. Speaker. Because you cannot tell me that situation lent itself to any kind of transparency, not even an iota thereof. None at all. 26 reasons. You know about that member from Southern? Yes. So, Mr. Speaker, let me get back to this other thing. But that, in a nutshell, was the modus operandi of the last administration. Sideline every piece of legislation and do as they please. But, Mr. Speaker, to conclude on the Shock and Talvern developments, when Fresh Start was terminated on Shock, they claimed $10,000 short of $27 million. Their claim on Shock, Mr. Speaker, for work done to date was $26,990,000. Yes, that is what they claimed. What did the team find, Mr. Speaker? The team found, Mr. Speaker, to start Shock all over again, to take virgin territory and to bring it to completion would not even cost that much. It would cost some $23 million, $4 million less for what they are claiming, although they have not executed 50% of the work. They assert, Mr. Speaker, that the work done to date is approximately $11 million and that we would need a further $12 million to complete that project. But, Mr. Speaker, what is even more telling, and again, the lawlessness, what is even more telling, Mr. Speaker, that there is no compatibility between the road network on the ground and that on the drawing. I can yield to you, you know, because I have a way of just, sorry, I forget the statement, you know, Mr. Speaker. I'm always ready to go. So, Mr. Speaker, a total of $23 million would have taken Shock from a standpoint of virgin lands to having all the infrastructure erected, inclusive of water and electricity. But I was saying, Mr. Speaker, what is even more telling? That the road network on the ground at Shock and the drawings, there is no congruence, there is no compatibility. What is on the ground, how they cut the roads, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the drawing, you would be looking at something totally foreign. There is no nexus. And therefore, the team has urged, in fact, they have indicated that we have no choice but to withdraw the Shocks application from DCA and to present a new application that takes cognizance of the current road configuration on the ground. That is what the last administration is putting this country through. And it is all because of an inherent lawlessness in their modus operandi, the way they operate. Lawlessness alone. Complete lawlessness. Complete lawlessness. And those are the kind of things that happen, Mr. Speaker, when you give a minister to act minister as prime minister for a day, and he gives $12 million worth of direct awards in that one day. That is what happens, Mr. Speaker. And now we are paying the price. We are paying the penalty. But one thing I'm sure of, Mr. Speaker, once those people remain around me in the John Peters, the Adrian Dalsey, the Terence St. Clair to advise me, the government, NHC, we will move forward and we will ensure that we restore both of those developments and bring benefit to the people of this country of ours. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to Talvin, again, when the NHC terminated the agreement with Fresh Start, they claimed 7 million. 7 million. But the team found, Mr. Speaker, that the work executed to date was worth no more than 3 million. Now, you know, when I saw the report, and I looked at the letter, Fresh Start demanding 7 million, the experts saying, no, this work is worth no more than 3 million. It reminded me, Mr. Speaker, you see, it's not my fault that I have a memory bank that's as large as this room. My head may be big, Mr. Speaker, but it stores a lot. It stores a lot. And the space in my head, I just wish the former Prime Minister would have had a big head like me and he stores stuff the same way. But Mr. Speaker, head is. No. Oh, no, definitely. No. I can't do that to you. Not. But Mr. Speaker, you know what that reminded me of? When I saw 3 million versus 7 million, it reminded me of the foundation for St. Jude. The foundation of the new St. Jude, Mr. Speaker, was estimated by government technocrats to cost $3 million. $3 million. Guess what? When it landed into the lap of that very company with the very same minister, the bill was 9 million. From 3 million to 9 million. And so, Mr. Speaker, I understand how that relationship between that contractor and that former government led to prices that were so inflated that if Putin had already invaded Ukraine, it would have been about 100 million for the foundation alone. You know, and on that same St. Jude, Mr. Speaker, you know, no, honestly, I can't wait for the special prosecutor. Mr. Speaker, on that same St. Jude, there was a direct award of $26 million signed by the member for Miku South in his capacity as Prime Minister. $26 million for architectural designs. Architectural designs, Mr. Speaker. And on that same St. Jude, another direct award to that same company, 11 days before an election, 11 days for 70 million. 70 million. Oh Lord, what would we have done if there was no date like July 26, 2021? What would we have done? You know, and Mr. Speaker, that is the kind of pattern, that is the kind of pattern that those people adopted. And it's like the courts, once you're found guilty before sentence, they take cognizance of your track record. These people have a track record of inflated costs on every project. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, in that regard, the special prosecutor will have his work cut out for him. Indeed. Mr. Speaker, he's ours, that's true. Our well-received National Housing Assistance Program has been embraced by the majority, but yet finds itself the subject of ridicule, I dare say, through regret of them not doing the same thing for anybody. So it received unfavorable discussion by supporters of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, I challenge anyone in the last administration to show me with tangible evidence the existence of any housing structure across the length and breadth of St. Lucia built by the last administration. You take up my challenge, Mr. Member for Susan? There was not one house, Oh, what they did? Oh, yeah, they brought horses on an air-conditioned plane. Why didn't you all ask the member for Viewford South permission to land that plane with those horses? And took 1,000 acres of our land. 1,000 acres. The gall, man, the audacity. For 99 years at $1 an acre. And you know what hurts, Mr. Speaker? The member for Swazel, who is a banker, who knows about due diligence, who knows about reading a document in its entirety, because whether you read it or not, once you signed it, you're bound by its terms. He would let us say on the media that he signed it, but he didn't realize it had those terms. I have the clip, Mr. Speaker, and I could make it a clip of the House. Don't argue with me, no. I could make it a clip of the House. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, we are doing this housing project. Can I help you? Mr. Speaker, we are doing this housing project, the housing assistance project. And I said that the last administration did not repair or build any kind of structure for anyone in this country. They built stables for horses. And so, Mr. Speaker, we in government, in less than a year, in about 10 months, Mr. Speaker, we have helped many St. Lucians who were either homeless or lived in deplorable conditions. Many homeless people now have a place to call home, Mr. Speaker. When a man in Dennery lives in a half-covered shed, half-covered, Mr. Speaker, that he takes, he pushes the sponge under the half of the shed that's covered, but he's still subjected to the elements. When this man is given a brand new house, much bigger than his, with a brand new bed, what is better than that, Twatini? And you have persons complaining. You have persons complaining, Mr. Speaker. You have 3 men who were sleeping on the boats, on the fishing boats when they turned them upside down. They found comfort in sleeping under there. Another slept in the shed where the fishermen kept the fuel and the fishing gear. Today, each of them have a house and keys to that house. What is better than that? Battery. What is better than that, member for Swazel? You know. So, Mr. Speaker, although the program was not designed to build houses, it is because there are men and women in this government with a conscience which drives their humanity. When it drives their humanity, they realize building a home for some people is almost the only option, no matter how small that home is. And that's the direction they feel compelled to go. So, you had 3 houses in Dennery, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to conclude here. Measuring 192 square feet, 16 by 12. And persons who had done nothing for anyone are making a big brouhaha about it. It's small, but I'll say this, Mr. Speaker. In California, a state with trillions of dollars worth of resources, those houses are twice as big. Those in Dennery. In Hawaii, Mr. Speaker, there is a special project called the Tiny Homes Project. The houses are 8 by 8. 8 by 8, 64 square feet. Those in Dennery are 3 times bigger. Hawaii, where all the movie stars live or own a home. 8 by 8. But in St. Lucia, we should give them a 1,000 by 2,000. And that is the kind of, you know, those asinine statements, Mr. Speaker, they really don't touch on one's humanity and one's conscience. Because a man's home is his castle. It is not the size of his home. It is a structure where he finds solace and comfort. That's what it is. And when I went down to Dennery deliberately, Mr. Speaker. One of the houses was not even complete yet. And one of the guys who was sleeping under the boat, he begged for money, went to buy a broom. The people have finished it up, but he started to sweep already. He went in and started sweeping. Yes. That is a degree of appreciation that should remain etched in our minds. That is what it is about, having a conscience and a show of humanity. So, Mr. Speaker, homes for the homeless in Dennery, but they have a problem. St. Lucians, oh yeah, Bakowen is another one. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, one was built in his constituency, in Sarah. Mr. Speaker, you won't believe this. A lady, we were there, we handed over the keys. And a lady told Buck Owen, if you think another woman will come in this house, I claiming that I'm your woman from now. She said so openly, and that is the kind of sentiments, appreciation, and embrace that help has received, Mr. Speaker. And yeah, there are 3 brothers in Opico, in Grace Vieux Fort North. I went there, the member invited me to the handover. Mr. Speaker, it was so touching. 3 brothers who have literally lived in, you know what we call a pit toilet, the size of that? Each of them had one juxtaposed to each other. The size, that's where they lived. Today, they enjoy a 3-bedroom house. I want us to put our hands together for the member from Devon. Bringing relief to our people, Mr. Speaker. And try as we may, Mr. Speaker, we can never ever deliver on all the goodies. Because when you have the president of the world's richest country, the world's most powerful country, can tell the world that he can do nothing about gas prices and he can do nothing about food prices, people in St. Lucia expect Philip J. Pierre to work magic. It can't happen. It can't happen. We have to leave the reality of our situation. And I don't think it was Philip J. Pierre who asked Putin to go into Ukraine. I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, our economy is such that we feel the effects of the indiscretions of other world leaders, and that's a sad reality. But there is very little that we can do. It is just like climate change. We feel the brunt of it, but we emit very little carbon into the atmosphere. But guess who? We feel it. So, Mr. Speaker, with this program, that is not to say that we have not had teething problems. Yes, we have had, because it is quite innovative. Payments take too long, and I inherited a situation where the councillors as well, I inherited all of this. The stipends are not being paid on time. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, you proceed with such haste that subtle barriers prevent you from executing the way you would like to. But I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, that persons who work with me and around me understand that we cannot settle for not paying persons their legitimate emoluments which they expect at a given date. And I've asked my PS, Mr. Speaker, to reflect my desires in the swift dispensation of entitlements by anyone, whether it is a worker at the council, whether it is a stipend by councillors, or whether it is someone who worked under the National Housing Assistance Program. Mr. Speaker, we have had a little problem, and like I said, sometimes you get an open bill for materials, but by the time the check is processed, with such bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker, you find that the price of materials have gone up. So you ask me for 5 sheets of plywood, I ask you for an open bill. It's $150, $750, you get the check, take it to M&C, M&C tell you you're short of $120. That is the reality. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am hoping that shortly my cabinet colleagues will assist our department and would sanction the introduction of a new mechanism where material and persons can be paid at most within 48 hours, Mr. Speaker. Once the invoices are presented and there is the due diligence and everything is in order, they should be paid within 48 hours. We have taken note, Mr. Speaker, of our initial difficulties and will initiate changes to deal with them. Mr. Speaker, as I end, let me say I welcome the tabling of those bills in the chamber today and look forward to the ensuing debate on them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues.